this FFD to try and create a sort of a slightly curved wedge shape for my UFO. So I've got my FFD, it's a child of my cube. I need to go into points mode to get access to the little points on the edges of this FFD. So I'm in points mode, so it's over on the left hand side of your screen. Now when I select these points and grab my move tool, now I can start to reshape things. So I want this to be kind of symmetrical, so I'm going to be selecting a number of points and kind of scaling them together. So first of all, I need to make this wedge shaped. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my selection tool. This is the little selector inside a circle, and I'm going to click and drag across all 9 points at one end of my cube. So all those points are selected. And I'm going to grab my scale tool. I'm going to scale all these points down. So if I grab my scale tool, I can scale them down vertically if I want to, which actually I don't want to. I'm going to leave them as they are. I'm going to scale them horizontally. My screen's just gone a little odd. Let me just undo a couple of steps. There we go. So I'm going to scale these points down side to side. And now I'm going to grab my select tool again. I'm going to click and drag to paint the selection over this other end. I'm going to grab my scale tool and I'm going to scale these downwards. So now I'm getting this wedge kind of shape going on. Okay, this is looking a bit more interesting. Okay, I can just turn on my cloner just to see what that looks like. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. I've got the wedge shape going. So that taper I had before definitely is not the right tool. Actually, I'm going to delete that taper now because it's making my view a little untidy. So I'm just going to select it and delete it. Okay, the other thing is these edges on my clones are already flat. I'd kind of like them to curve. So maybe if I pull those points on the FFD out, I can make a bit of a curve here. So let's turn off the cloner. Let's go back to this FFD and I'm going to select just these 3 points down the middle. I'm just going to use my shift select and click on each one. I grab my move tool and just move them out. For me it's along this blue Z axis. And now I'm getting a bit of a curve going on. I've got a bunch of segments in my original cube. Let me just turn on my shading with lines so I can see them. There we go. I've got a whole bunch of segments there. So as I pull this FFD around, I can actually make a bit of a curved edge. So this is a much better deformer to use to try and make this shape. Okay, if I turn my cloner back on, okay, this is getting a bit more interesting. Now the really good thing is I can leave my cloner turned on if I want to, and I can keep working on the FFD, and I'll actually see the changes update. So in my FFD I've currently got these points selected around the edge of my UFO. So if I keep them selected, when I drag them now, I can actually see how it's affecting this UFO shape. So I can get a curvature that looks a little more regular. Now I've got big gaps between my cloned wedges now, so I could go back to that cloner and just shift that Z position which was controlling where they are, and if I leave a little bit of a gap between them, I'll get a little bit of a notch kind of thing there. But now I've definitely got much more of a UFO kind of shape going on. Now the great thing is, because we're building this as, you know, a series of radial segments, anything we do to this segment here will get updated with all of these clone segments. My segments are kind of overlapping a little bit when they're butting up against each other, so maybe I can scale in the sides of this wedge a little bit. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to the FFD and I'm going to select the sides of it. And I'm going to scale these inwards, but what I'll do is I'll turn my cloner back on. So as I scale them in side to side, I can actually see in the view, there they are kind of lining up with each other. Now I've got still a bit of a gap at the end, so maybe my other end needs to be a little bit wider. So all I'm doing now is I'm just going around and reshaping this FFD, this deformer that's around my cube, to try and make it all fit together nicely. The other thing that I can do with my cube, which is really handy, I can go back to that original cube, and there's this fillet setting which will round off the edges on the cube, so I can turn that on. I can change the radius or the roundness of that edge. No, I might just put a small fillet radius, and it just means I've got that little sort of groove that runs all along these pieces now. So this is definitely starting to look a lot more like my UFO base shape. So with a little bit more tweaking on that FFD, I should have something that is pretty good. Once I've finished working on the FFD, just remember to go back to model mode, which is the top left cube on your interface, and we're dealing with the whole object again.